Hello, and welcome back to our podcast. I'm the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the Gentleman.
On this episode, we're going to be finishing up talking about some Australian folklore and things of that nature. We're going to be talking about some of the Aboriginal folklore and some of their mythological beings, I suppose you might call them, and just some facts about Australians and different things that are kind of interesting. So first, we're going to start out talking about a brief history of the Aboriginal Australians. This basically refers to various indigenous people of the Australian mainland and many of its islands, and the people who first migrated to Australia, and this happened around 65,000 years ago. So they've been there for a while. And over time, they've formed as many as 500 language-based groups, and these people share a broad, complex genetic history, and DNA studies have confirmed that they're one of the oldest living populations in the world, and some say they have the oldest continuous culture on Earth. So that's actually pretty cool.
That is pretty cool, yeah.
Very interesting. So the first creature, so to speak, that we're going to talk about that's very famous with the Aboriginal people, and it's pretty much across all of them, is the Rainbow Serpent. And it's often called like a creator god, basically. And it's sometimes depicted as an actual rainbow or, a snake. It can be, several different things. They also sometimes when they're doing rituals to please the serpent or whatever, things like that, they'll use stuff called like rainbow quartz and certain seashells, basically because the quartz acts as a prism and the shells exhibit the iridescence of the colors found in the serpent. So it kind of makes it, look like.
This actually kind of reminds me of Jormungandr from the Norse legends, the snake that wraps around the world.
Right. Now, this is also, ironically enough, related to the bunyip as well. So it's kind of weird. It's sometimes depicted as males in some cultures. Some say it's a female and some say it's bigender. So, it just depends on what group you're talking to. Sometimes it has like a crest or a mane on its head, and sometimes it's even said to be bearded. And it's thought to be related, like I said, to the bunyip, which is a fearsome waterhole dwelling creature in Australian mythology that we've talked about earlier on another episode.
Yep.
And unlike other deities, though, this one doesn't have a human form at all. It remains in the form of an animal. So that's actually kind of neat too.
That's interesting.
A lot of them don't do that,
No, most of them that I've seen have had human forms.
Right. So that's actually very interesting. Now, so in 1926, a British anthropologist named Professor Alfred Radcliffe Brown noted that many Aboriginal groups widely distributed across the Australian continent all appeared to share variations of a single myth. And they all spoke of an unusually powerful, often creative, and very often dangerous snake or serpent. And it was sometimes described as enormous in size, and it was described as being closely associated with rainbows, rain, river, and deep water holes. It's got many different names. I mean, there's a bunch, but a few of them are like Takin, Targan, and Wawi. There's a bunch of others, though. It's generally described as a snake of enormous size, and it's often said to be living in the deepest water holes of many of Australia's waterways. And some even say that it descended from a larger being that was visible as a dark streak in the Milky Way. So
that's
kind of
interesting.
Weird. Yeah, interesting. So they're saying it's like this big snake that came out of the Milky Way almost. It's said to reveal itself to people as a rainbow as it moves through water and rain. And because it was known as like the creator god, it's said to shape landscapes, and it was heard also singing and naming places. So it made like valleys, hills, rivers, streams, lakes, and then you could hear it singing, and it would be naming these places as well. It sometimes is known to swallow or drown people and to strengthen the knowledgeable with rainmaking and healing powers. So,
all right, then.
Right. And some even say that it can cure or can cause rather weakness, illness, sores, and even death in others. And even the bunyip was identified as a rainbow serpent in Aboriginal culture. So, that's kind of interesting too.
This thing can't seem to decide whether it wants to be good or bad.
Right. It said that it Also, some groups believe that it emerged from the ground and awakened all the animals, and that's why we have animals. And then, of course, it shaped the earth, creating mountains, valleys, hills, and all that. And it's also said that it can bring rain, but it will cause droughts if it's disrespected.
That makes sense.
Right.
All things considered.
And it was also known to judge wrongdoing and punish those who misbehave. And it can be a giver of life or a destructive force if angry. So
well, this thing does it all then.
It does. So that's pretty cool. I mean, it does everything. So, I mean, it goes across the spectrum of just pretty much everything you can think of. So another common Aboriginal myth tells of a mythical, exotic, most often English character that arrives from the sea, bringing Western colonialism, which is the pursuing, establishing, and maintaining of control and exploitation of people and or resources by a foreign group. And this person is often said to come offering gifts to the people they encounter, or they are said to bring great harm, depending on the teller of the story. The key mythical character is often called Captain Cook, which is often attributed to being James Cook, and he was the one who was supposed to bring British rule to Australia. But with the Aboriginal telling, his arrival is not celebrated, and he is depicted as a villain, which I can understand.
Yeah.
He arrived in Australia sometime in April 1770, and is known to be the first European to reach the east coast in Australia, making landfall near present-day Point Hicks. So, yeah, I can definitely see why they would see him as a villain. I mean, if this was where they lived and he just came in, because I'm sure they weren't nice to them or anything either. So, I can definitely see that. Now, whether or not it always is him, I don't know. Just because they're saying Captain Cook doesn't necessarily mean it's always him. I mean, they may be talking about somebody, who knows, But anyway, that's who a lot of people think that's what they're talking about. So, another interesting thing about the Aborigines is their views on death. So, the death of someone is in their belief system, basically, is similar to European traditions or, really kind of worldwide traditions. And that's most notably is that, they'll have a ceremony of sorts to mark the death of an individual. And then usually there's a period of mourning. So there's like a funeral type thing, but it's not quite like ours because the similarities are pretty superficial. The only real similarities are the ceremony and the mourning period. So in death, as in life, Aboriginal spirituality gives preeminence to the land and sees the deceased as linked indissolubly by a web of subtle connections to the greater whole. So basically, they think they're linked, their spirit and everything is linked to everything. When a person dies, some form of the person's spirit and also their bones go back to the country they were born in. So when a person dies, their country suffers, such as trees die and become scarred because it's believed that they came into the presence of the deceased person. Now, that doesn't mean that actually happens. That's just what they believe. Like if they see like a tree dying or something, they're saying that that's what it is. Their spirit came into contact with that. So when an Aboriginal person dies, the families have death ceremonies known as sorry business. So that's it's not funny, but it's kind of.
It's an apt name.
Yeah. So during this time, the person is mourned for the family. Is mourned for days by the family and friends, where they gather together and cry and share their grief. And often the family members will stay in one room and mourn together. So they'll put all the family members off in one room where they can sit around and whatever and have their private time. It's also taboo to name or say a person's name after their death, as it's thought that this could disturb the spirit. So after somebody dies, you're not supposed to say their name. And photos of the deceased are also forbidden for the same reason. So if somebody dies, which people don't really do that so much anymore, but that used to be a big thing where people would take pictures of people in coffins and stuff. People don't do it as much. I mean, I'm sure some people do, but it's not as big a thing. But anyway, a smoking ceremony may also be conducted, which uses smoke on the belongings and the home of the deceased, which is believed to aid in releasing the spirit. So they'll basically kind of, I guess, what we might consider smudge, where they'll hold some, and wave smoke around or whatever on the belongings and their house and different things like that. So the mourning period can last days, weeks, and sometimes even months, depending on the social status of the deceased person. So the more important they were in the society or whatever, the longer it would be. It's also considered culturally inappropriate for a non-Aboriginal person to notify the next of kin of a person's passing.
That's kind of fitting.
So if you find out an Aboriginal person has died, you're not supposed to tell them the next of kin. You're supposed to tell somebody else and let them tell it. When a person passes, the family will move out of their house and another family will move in. And some families will even move to something called sorry camps, which are usually farther away. Mourning the person includes the reciting of symbolic chants, singing of songs, painting the body, and sometimes they'll even make cuts on their body.
I've heard of that before.
Yeah, for mourning purposes. Yeah, there's a lot of different rituals where people do stuff like that, or they'll hurt themselves.
There's a lot of different religions and belief systems that have similar things to be done to corpses.
Exactly. And some Aboriginal cultures, the body is placed on a raised platform for several months, and they're covered in native plants or placed in a cave or tree where the body remains, and then basically until it, goes away. And then sometimes family and friends will scatter them in varying ways, or sometimes place them in a special place. Now, I guess I don't know what the special place would be. Maybe somewhere they locked or something. I don't know. But so many of them believe in a place called the Land of the Dead, which is commonly known as the Sky World, which is just the sky itself. As long as certain rituals were carried out during their life and the time of their death, they're allowed to enter. The rituals performed are said to allow the person to return to the womb of all time, which is known as dream time. And they are a very big believer in dream time. This allows the spirit to be connected once more to all of nature, their ancestors, and to their own personal meaning and place within the larger scheme of things. So yeah, that is very interesting too. But yeah, they got to do, certain rituals, all these different things and whatever, so that, they can, enter the sky world and whatever and return to dream time so they can be reconnected with everything. So one myth that I found that was kind of interesting. It's one where it says that there was this ceremony that was supposed to initiate young men into adulthood. And it says that a woman known as Majinga, which means old woman, was in charge of the young children. But instead of watching them during the parents' absence, she instead swallowed them and tried to escape as a giant snake. Because, why wouldn't she?
Oh, that went from 0 to 100 very quickly.
So the people followed her and speared her and removed the undigested children from the body. This myth is sometimes even acted out by having young, unadorned children to pretend to be swallowed by this ancestral being and then be regurgitated before being accepted as young adults with all the rights and privileges of young adults. I mean,
that went so far south so quickly.
That would be an interesting ceremony to witness. I mean, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not making fun of it by any stretch, but I mean, that would be something, for us, that would be something we would not normally see. So that would be very interesting. So the next thing we're going to talk about is more or less, this one I ran across and I actually just found it funny. And I've heard of it before, but I'd forgotten about it. And it's the Emu Wars.
Oh, the Emu Wars. I love the Emu Wars.
So in 1932, the town Capian was the site of the weirdest military campaign in history.
That's an understatement.
So there was approximately 20,000 emus. And if you don't know what that is, it's like a bird that's sort of similar to an ostrich, just a little smaller, but they're very similar. And they'd been eating the region's wheat crops. So, to combat this, the 70 heavy battery of the Royal Australian Artillery decided to put an end to the situation. And I mean, they really did a good job.
Oh yeah. It's not like they could have lost against a bunch of emus.
I mean, really, you wouldn't think they could. But, so they sent in soldiers, machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. However, the military soon discovered that they had greatly underestimated the situation. They found out the emus were really good at quickly breaking into smaller groups, which made them almost impossible to be hit by the bullets. And then when they were shot, they didn't really seem to care. They just kept going on about their business. So the military struggled with the guns that were jamming and vehicles that were unable to keep up with them because the emus could run speeds of 50 kilometers an hour, which is roughly 32 miles an hour.
I didn't know they could run that fast.
The war lasted a week before the military gave up, and they had killed an estimated 50 to 200 of the 20,000 emus. I don't know. That is just hilarious to me to think about.
Jesus.
As they go out there with all these, machine guns against 20,000 emus, and they basically don't even put even a remote dent in them.
And the emus never fought back either.
Yeah, they just ran around pretty much and just got shot.
And they won.
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't even keep up with them and, the cars and stuff. So, yeah. So, another thing that I ran across that I thought was actually kind of funny and interesting too was the Gentleman Bushranger. So this is Ben Hall, and he's a lesser known bushranger from Australia, which is kind of like a outlaw, we would call him in America. And he was responsible for over 100 robberies between 1863 and 1867. So he was getting down with it.
Oh, yeah.
He was also known to appreciate a good time. And he also never reportedly killed anyone and seemed to make it his mission in life to humiliate the authorities.
That's impressive.
So on 2 separate occasions, Hall and his gang robbed a hotel in New South Wales, and they locked the local police in their own cells and then threw a huge party for all the townspeople. So he was known as
this is impressive.
The Gentleman
The fact that he was able to keep that up for so long and reportedly had never killed anybody.
Yeah, supposedly never killed. Now, I don't know whether he did or didn't, but they said reportedly never did.
Assuming that's true, holy crap.
Exactly. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is something that I've always found interesting, and that was how Australia was basically kind of founded with the English, you might say, was when they were basically a penal colony. So, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. So between 1788 and 1868, the British penal system transported about 162,000 convicts from Great Britain, Ireland, Canada, India, New England, Hong Kong, the West Indies, to various penal colonies in Australia. So that really tells you how much Britain used to really have. Because,
oh, yeah.
I mean, Canada, all these places that you didn't really, even realize.
There's a reason it's called Great Britain.
Right. Not necessarily Canada, but like India, Hong Kong, come on now. But the British government had initially sent convicts overseas to the American colonies in the early 18th century, and they were sent there to serve as workers. But then after the transatlantic transportation ended with the start of the American Revolution, this forced them to seek alternative destinations to relieve further overcrowding. So Australia was then seen as the place, as it was charted and was possession of the East Australia had been claimed for Britain by James Cook, as we mentioned earlier, in 1770. So then they started sending them there. So between 1788 and 1852, about 24,000 transportees were women, which is kind of crazy too.
Yeah.
Women accounted for approximately 1 in 7 of the convicts that were sent there. So that's kind of nuts, because you really wouldn't think, there would be that many women. You would kind of think they might want to keep the women at home more and send the men, because that's generally what they do, but apparently they didn't care. So 80% of the women who were sent there had been convicted of theft. So that's pretty crazy, sentencing to get sent to a whole nother continent, basically, because you got sent, there for theft. And who knows what they stole. I mean, they could have been stealing bread or something, because it was like the 1700s. So, that was not a good time to be alive. Many of these women, for protection, learned they needed to, do something, basically. So they usually quickly attached themselves to male officers or male convicts. And often they were routinely referred to as courtesans. But no women were actually, which a courtesan, if you don't know, is a prostitute.
Yeah.
But women that were never transported there for this, as it was not a transportable offense, which why, I don't know why theft would necessarily be,
all things considered, these women were pretty smart.
Exactly.
They made a good call there.
There you go. So the population of England and Wales, this was basically during the 1700s to 1740, had remained pretty steady at 6 million. So for a good while, about 40 years, there was only about 6 million people living there. But after 1740, it began to rise considerably. And by the time of the American Revolution, which started in 1765, the streets were overcrowded and it was filled with unemployed, flooded with cheap gin, and which led to crime becoming a major problem. And this quickly led to, the overcrowding of prisons and hulks, which was a ship that was basically couldn't be sailed anymore, that they kept prisoners in, which is kind of nuts too. So
that's smart.
Yeah. So that's basically why it blew up, so bad, why so many people were, sent there. But, it's kind of nuts when you think about it that doesn't seem like there was a whole bunch going on in Australia with Britain supposedly charting it and taking possession or whatever until they basically needed to send a bunch of convicts there, which is kind of nuts.
It is.
And, that's some of the places like Port Arthur and places like that, some of those different places are, highly haunted that we talked about on another episode. And that was supposed to be some of the, different things were around there. So I'm imagining it wasn't a good place to be by any stretch whatsoever.
Most likely not, no.
But yeah, so those are some of the ones that I ran across that I just thought were interesting. But all of it's definitely interesting. I mean, the Rainbow Serpent and all that. I mean,
Emu War.
Yeah, the Emu War. It was just hilarious. And a lot of people may have never actually heard of it. If you haven't, oh my gosh, it is.
It is amazing. I highly suggest looking into it for yourself. Definitely. It is a very interesting story.
It is very interesting, and it's cool.
It's definitely good for a laugh.
It is. I mean, you just got to think there's 20,000 emus, and they killed maybe 50 to 200.
It makes it seem like these soldiers were inept, but in reality, emus are very hard to get rid of.
Apparently,
because they do travel in such large herds.
They are, and they're quick to move. I mean, they can maneuver pretty fast. I mean, I saw.
Oh,
we used to have, I don't know if he still does or not. We had a neighbor that actually raised them, and these things can move. So, yeah, they're apparently not something you want to trifle with.
Oh, no.
So, even if you got your machine guns out, you might want to leave the emus alone. So, that's going to wrap us up for this week. Next week, we're going to be heading to Italy and talking about some folklore and things of that nature. And then, of course, talking about the cryptids and all that good stuff. We want to thank everyone for their comments, for giving us the support. We're also working on some episodes where we're trying to get some real life ghost stories and paranormal experiences. We've had some comments of people who said that they actually did have some experiences with Australia and the bush and stuff. So we're trying to gather some stories like that. If you have any, it doesn't have to be from Australia, from anywhere. We definitely love to hear them because we would definitely love to share some true stories of people's experiences. Doesn't matter if it's paranormal, it could be you saw something crazy, a cryptid, you saw Bigfoot. We don't care. We want to hear about it. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to
stay disturbed.